Everybody's focused on who the new Falcons defensive coordinator will be, but today we're going to talk about whether or not the offensive coordinator is getting the job done.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com. RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me. As everydayers, that means you make it your first listen each and every day. To become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are talking about the three areas that we need to see improvement on offense this upcoming season, from offensive coordinator Zac Robinson talking about play action, the diversity of the run game, and marrying the play action and the run game together. Of course, the news of the day is that the Falcons have set up an interview for their vacant defensive coordinator position with Steve Wilks next week, but we'll get more into that on tomorrow's episode, presumably with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, as well as fulfill a special request to talk about Kyle Pitts. So that's all in store for you tomorrow. Today, I want to talk about the offensive coordinator. Right. And I've been probably more critical of Zac Robinson than probably anybody else. And the reason why is a lot of the issues I have with Zac Robinson are issues I had with some of his predecessors. Like I remember with Steve Sarkisian, we were very critical of the Falcons' struggles against quality defense during his tenure in Atlanta. Dirk Cutter, we were critical of his inability to marry the run game and the play action passing game. With Arthur Smith, I remember people saying the downfall of the Falcons' run scheme in 2023 was because of the very one-note rushing attack that the Falcons had back then. And meanwhile, Zac Robinson's checking all three of these same boxes, and I'm supposed to give him a pass for that? Now, we'll start with the play action when we talk about these things, because essentially the Falcons had the worst play action passing game in the entire NFL this year. And these numbers come from PFF. And you look at the percentage of dropbacks that use play action, the Falcons, 14% this year, was dead last in the NFL. The NFL average in that category was 25%. You look at their completion rate on play action passes. The Falcons completed 56% of their passes, dead last in the NFL. The NFL average was 68%. Falcons averaged 7 yards per attempt on their play action pass, which was 25th in the NFL. The NFL average was 8.3. Falcons were the only team in the NFL to not have a single touchdown off of play action this year, which was dead last in the NFL. The NFL average was 7 touchdowns off of play action. The Falcons, play action, you want to get those chunk yards, so you want to get first downs. The Falcons, only about 32% of their play action passing attempts resulted in a first down, which was 31st in the NFL, second to last, while the NFL average in that category was 42%. And their passer rating on play action contests was 68, which was dead last in the NFL, while the NFL average on play action passing, their passer rating was 101. And you look at that and you say, well, yeah, the Falcons' play action passing was bad because of Michael Penix. But then when you look at the numbers in the 3-game sample that we had of Michael Penix's numbers were virtually identical to what Kirk Cousins were, right? 14% dropbacks would have been dead last in the NFL. Michael Penix completed 50% of his play action passes. That would have been dead last in the NFL. Michael Penix averaged 7.1 yards per attempt on his play action passes. That would have been 25th in the NFL. Also had 0 touchdowns. 31% first down percentage per attempt would have been 31st in the NFL. And his passer rating was 73, which would have been dead last in the NFL. And so, again, we have a smaller sample size of Michael Penix in 3 games, but again, the numbers don't really change. And it goes to show what I've been harping on before, where it's like the Falcons' issues in play action was not because of one quarterback and another quarterback was going to magically solve. It's not a quarterback issue. It's not a Kirk Cousins issue, not a Michael Penix issue. The Falcons' issues in play action is a Zac Robinson issue. And the hope is that we'll see an increased use of play action for the Falcons in 2025 and an increase in production off of that play action, which will be hugely beneficial to a young quarterback like Michael Penix into the future. That when you look around the NFL, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, and you sort of see who are the most successful young quarterbacks in the NFL, there's a pretty high correlation, and we know correlation is not causation, but there's a pretty high correlation between the successful young quarterbacks in their first and second years in the NFL and those offenses that make the most out of their play action, that use a high dosage of play action and are productive with their play action, right? And the one sort of counter example of a young quarterback that succeeded despite, not being in a heavily play action based offense was arguably Joe Burrow with the Cincinnati Bengals, where 22% of Joe Burrow's dropbacks in 2020, his rookie season, were play action, 19% in 2021, which again were below average numbers. But on those play action passes in those first 2 years, about Joe Burrow had over 1,800 of his passing yards in those 30 games that he played in those first 2 years. That was about 25% of Joe Burrow's total yards. You compare that to Michael Penix's, only about 15% of his total yards in the final 3 games came off of play action. So just to get to Joe Burrow's level, you would have to essentially double the amount of play action in his production. And right. And again, I think honestly, Joe Burrow is at the low end of that spectrum. And really, if you're in the Falcons, you want to triple that number, maybe even quadruple that number for Michael Penix in terms of getting more out of their play action passing. So basically, I'm sitting here telling you their play action passing game needs to be at least 2, if not 3 or 4 times better than what it is right now. And I could sit here and beat a dead horse about the Falcons not attacking the middle of the field while Kirk Cousins was the quarterback, given how productive he was attacking that area of the field during his previous years in Minnesota. But we'll move past that, right? Kirk Cousins' time in Atlanta is done. It's the Michael Penix era. So let's focus on Michael Penix. According to Next Gen Stats, Michael Penix was very efficient on play action passes throwing over the middle this year. He went 4 for 4 for 51 yards, averaging nearly 13 yards per attempt, and had a passer rating of 119 on those play action throws over the middle. And just for the sake of comparison, I wanted to look at Matt Stafford's numbers on play action passes over the middle, just to sort of see how the master, Sean McVay, is doing things in comparison to the student, Zac Robinson. And Stafford went 53 of 70 on play action passes over the middle for 701 yards, a touchdown. He had a yards per attempt of 10 and a passer rating of 112. So, and based off of those numbers, Michael Penix is doing better than Matt Stafford. But those play action passes over the middle accounted for about 13.5% of all of Matt Stafford's throws in 2024. Basically, 1 out of every 7.5 throws he attempted was a play action pass over the middle, not just a play action pass. Meanwhile, for Michael Penix, play action pass over the middle only was about 3.5% of his throws. So 1 out of every 28.5 pass attempts. So again, another indicator of 4 times the difference in terms of play action being used in Sean McVay's offense to attack the middle of the field versus Michael Penix in Atlanta's offense. So again, I think Zac Robinson needs to get on board with the rest of the trends in the NFL. We'll talk more about that when it comes to the run game later in today's episode. But you look back at 2016 when Matt Ryan won the MVP. The Falcons ran the most play action of any team in the league that year, with about 26% of all their dropbacks being play action passing, right? Matt Ryan also had nearly 2,000 yards off of that play action passing, which, I think is related to him winning MVP that year. But nowadays, 8 years later, the average in the NFL is 25% play action. And so basically what that means is the league over the last better part of a decade has been trending in a direction where more and more play action is being used. While meanwhile, Zac Robinson is zigging while the rest of the league is zagging and going in the opposite direction and saying, we're not going to use play action, right? I don't think it's a coincidence, guys, that 12 out of the 14 teams in the playoffs this year had quarterbacks that finished in the top 16 in yards off of play action this year. And, the 13th team was 17th. And then the 14th team was 21st, the Steelers with Russell Wilson, which is still actually above average relative to all the quarterbacks in the NFL, but just didn't rank that way. But Zac Robinson, this man's an innovator. This man is an icon, right? And that's why I brought up that notion of the Falcons not running a tight end screen last week, right? For those that missed it, the Falcons were the only team in the NFL that didn't run a single tight end screen all season long. And some of y'all thought, at least one person thought I was just taking an unnecessary shot at Zac Robinson. What does that matter, Aaron? Well, to me, it's just, again, another example of the Falcons zigging while everybody else is zagging, right? It's another example of the Falcons offensive coordinator essentially being the smartest guy in the room because he's doing things that nobody else is doing, right? And again, y'all think that I'm not hyping up Michael Penix because I'm a Kirk Cousins apologist or a Michael Penix hater or whatever. It has nothing to do with Michael Penix, guys. It has nothing to do with the quarterback. I don't care who the quarterback is, guys. I don't know how many times I have to say that. It's about the environment that quarterback is being fostered in. And when you have a play caller that's on an island doing his own thing when nobody else is doing the same thing, you're either the smartest guy in the room or you're the dumbest guy in the room. And I'm sure you're guessing where I land on that. So you figure out which side you think Zac Robinson ends up on. And again, that's harsh, right? I don't think Zac Robinson's bad at his job, but I do think he has to do things better. And I think the play action passing game is one of those things. And I think all hopes for Michael Penix being the Lisan al-Gaib, the savior of this Atlanta Falcons franchise, it gets blown away in the sand, lost in the sands of Arrakis for all time if the Falcons can't get more production out of their play action passing game like pretty much every other successful team in the NFL does. But it's not just about the play action that Zac Robinson needs to improve upon. He also needs to diversify the run game, and we'll get into that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel is going to make the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. And that's $300 to keep the action going all playoff season long. And FanDuel is an app that's easy to navigate. It has a variety of bets to keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add a little bit of extra excitement this playoff season, FanDuel has you covered. My 3-leg parlay on FanDuel didn't hit last week, but I'm doubling down. I'm going with the 4-leg one this week in the playoffs, taking all the home teams, Kansas City, Detroit, Philadelphia, Buffalo, straight up in the money lines, right? And if it hits, well, I'll win 3 times my money. We love the parlay. Bet a little, win a lot. But, because parlays are hard to hit on, you still got to hedge. But that's the great thing about FanDuel, guys. There's so many different ways I can win that I can hedge some of these bets. So just find out all the ways that you can win by visiting FanDuel.com today. And make sure you get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And Game Time has exclusive zone deals on great seats for the upcoming college football championship game here in Atlanta, Georgia. These exclusive zone deals are specially selected sections of the stadium: 300 level sideline, 200 level in zone corner, and 200 level corner, where fans have the flexibility to find deeper discounts by letting Game Time choose their exact seats for the game. That's the beauty of Game Time, taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's easier to go see live events like this year's college football championship next Monday between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And you can check it out by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. But make sure you check out those exclusive zone deals in select sections of Mercedes-Benz Stadium to see those exclusive discounts by downloading Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So we know what the Falcons run scheme was built around, the outside zone run scheme. According to FTN Fantasy, 52% of the Falcons run plays were outside zone, by far the most in the NFL. The NFL average in that area was 21%. Now, outside zone is a staple of the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan disciples around the league. They're the front runners in leading outside zone, right? The Falcons led the league in outside zone usage, but if you look at the next 10 teams in terms of most outside zone runs this season, 6 of them were direct disciples of Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. So it's not as if running outside zone is a bad thing. It's just the degree in which the Falcons leaned on it, I think, was a little too much, right? You look at the 8 other teams besides Atlanta that have a direct lineage from Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, right? Obviously, San Francisco and the Rams are 2 of those teams. Tampa Bay with Liam Cohen, Green Bay with Matt LaFleur, Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell, New Orleans with Clint Kubiak, Houston with Bobby Slowick, and Miami with Mike McDaniel. Those 8 other teams average an outside zone usage of about 26%. So the Falcons are running outside zone twice as much as what your typical McVay Shanahan disciple is running. None of those teams ran it more than 35% of the time this past year. Again, this is another area where I feel like Zac Robinson is an outlier. Now, to Zac Robinson's credit, I did think you started to see a little bit more diversity in their run scheme after the bye week, right? Just a sprinkling of a couple of new run concepts. You got wham, you got crunch, right? A little bit more inside zone, a little bit more mid-zone run concepts added to the situation. Again, it was just a sprinkling, right? And again, I hope that's a signal of things to come. I hope this is means that they're trending in the right direction when it comes to diversifying the run game. But I don't want a sprinkle, guys. I want more than an appetizer, more than a amuse-bouche, right? I want a whole meal of different run concepts for this Falcons. I don't want the Falcons to be Vic Beasley when it comes to the run game, right? I don't want them to be one note, right? That's not a good thing. And just like it's not good to be a one-note pass rusher like we saw with Vic Beasley in his career when he was just a speed rusher, right? If he won with his first step, he could beat you. If he didn't win with his first step, he wasn't beating you. And we saw this, the perfect example that I used many years ago and continue to use to this day is you recall Vic Beasley in the 2 games against the Rams in 2016 and 2017 where he was going up against Rams right tackle Rob Havenstein. And he dominated Havenstein in that first game in 2016. It was one of the best games of Vic Beasley's career. And then when the Falcons played the Rams again in the playoffs in 2017, Vic Beasley was very quiet in that game. And basically what Rob Havenstein figured out in the meantime was, Vic Beasley just is a one-note speed pitcher, right? A speed rusher, right? He has one pitch, a fastball. And if I can time that fastball, I can hit him. I can hit that fastball. And he wasn't able to do it in 2016, but he made the adjustment in 2017 and shut Vic Beasley down. And I think defenses are basically Rob Havenstein. That they basically figure out, you got one pitch when it comes to your run scheme. Well, they can stop it at that point in time. And as good as the Falcons offensive line, they're not good enough to basically say, well, we're just going to be able to dominate every single body out there when it comes to just running the outside zone scheme. And again, you saw this kind of play out the previous year in 2023 where the Falcons run game after a dominant 2022 season, took a big step back in 2023. They took a major step forward in 2024 this year. To being back to be one of the better running teams in the NFL, but I don't want them to take a step back in 2025. And I'm worried about that happening if they don't diversify the runs game, right? If the defense is expecting a fastball, and they're all geared up to hit that fastball, then that's when you hit them with a different pitch, right? And if you do, you hit them with the curve, you hit them with the sinker, you hit them with whatever, right? They're going to be swinging that air, so to speak. So we know the challenge is going to be for this Falcon team because they built their offensive line basically to be a zone blocking team over the last decade. That's what they've majored in since Kyle Shanahan's arrival in 2015. They've leaned heavily in that, especially these last couple of years with Arthur Smith and now with Zac Robinson. And again, I don't think this is solely a Zac Robinson issue. I think a lot of that has to do with Dwayne Ledford being the run game coordinator, and what Dwayne Ledford has majored in throughout his time as a college coach and an NFL coach is an outside zone run scheme. So it's not just, hey, Zac Robinson needs to fix this. Both of these guys need to get together and solve this problem. So I do think because the Falcons are so much of a zone blocking team, I do think they can diversify with this group, right? It goes back to something I saw in 2014 when I remember the Falcons signed John Asamoah, a free agent from the Kansas City Chiefs that year. And the Chiefs were primarily a zone blocking team at that time. And I questioned the fit. I was like, I didn't love the Tyson Jackson signing, didn't love the Paul Solias signing. Even though I was a big fan of John Asamoah, the player, I didn't love the fit in Atlanta because the Falcons weren't a zone blocking team. They were a gap blocking team back in those days, right? But under new offensive line coach Wade Harmon and Mike Tice, they diversified their run scheme. They took advantage of having zone blockers like John Asamoah or Jake Matthews or Joe Hawley that were part of that offensive line. And instead of asking those guys to run a downhill gap scheme that they weren't necessarily going to fit well, and then not running a zone scheme that, this offense at that time with Dirk Cutter wasn't necessarily in love with running, they diversified by, okay, well, we'll take advantage of the athleticism that these guys have, but we're going to ask them to pull and trap and get them on the move to take advantage of that athleticism and still be able to run a lot of the gap concepts that we want to run. And I think you can do that with this current offensive line. We've seen Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry pull on the crack tosses on the outside. We can count on one hand how many times Matthew Bergeron and Drew Dahlman and Chris Lindstrom have pulled on run plays over the last couple of years. But when they have done it, I think they've done a good job of doing it. So I think the Falcons have an opportunity to diversify their run scheme by incorporating more gap and power concepts into their run game by taking advantage of the athleticism of getting their blockers on the move more, incorporating more counter runs, incorporating more off tackles and traps and whatnot. I want to see more jet sweeps from Rayron McLeod and others this year, right? The Falcons ran 11 jet sweeps or end arounds this past year, which was, I didn't look up the number for 2024, but the average in 2023 was about 11, right? But when you look at the Rams offense under Sean McVay, basically every single year, they're running like 20 plus jet sweeps and end arounds and reverses and all that stuff. right, since McVay's arrival. And again, when you run as much motion as the Rams do, as well as the Falcons running a similar amount, those jet sweeps and in arounds are an excellent change up to all that motion that you do in the passing game. So not only do I think diversifying the run game is going to benefit the Falcons because it's going to make it much harder for defenses to stop the Falcons running the football. I think that matters, right? Especially for a young quarterback like Michael Penix. Again, we sit here and we marvel at the performance he put up in week 18 against Carolina, and we're like, this is what the offense is going to be every single week. But I don't think you're paying attention to the challenges of the upcoming season, right? Because you're going to face much better teams and much better defenses than you face in that week 18 matchup in 2025, right? You get to face the San Francisco 49ers. You want to get into a straight drop back passing game with no play action, no run game against the 49ers and have Caleb McGarry blocking Nick Bosa 30 plus times? You think that's a good strategy? He barely could block Jadeveon Clowney. What do you think Nick Bosa is going to do to him? Right? I mean, you want to look at how you beat a team like the 49ers next year, right? Fun stat for you. You know what the 49ers record was when opposing teams ran the ball for over 140 yards this past season? 49ers were 0-9. So basically, hey, you get to 150 yards rushing, bam, you got a 100% chance of beating the 49ers, right? So again, we're going to sit here and spend the next 7 to 8 months fantasizing about the high-flying aerial attack under Michael Penix. And then when the season starts, we're going to start here and we're going to do crossovers being like, you know what the Falcons need to do? The keys to victory, control the line of scrimmage, run the football. Right? And, we can't, make light of, how important Michael Turner and Ovi Mihaly, shout out to Believe in Falcons, were to Matt Ryan's early success in the run game in his career, right? The first time Matt Ryan led the Falcons to victory in a game where he threw the ball 40 plus times wasn't until his third season. It was his 34th start. But yeah, Michael Penix is going to do that in starts 5 through 22 or whatever and do it 11 plus times or whatever people are fantasizing about. So, it's going to be different this time, Aaron, with Michael Penix. And that's not a shot at Michael Penix. It's just trying to sit here and tell people that, that are often the gumdrop and rainbows, la fantasy world that they're thinking, this is how reality works. And reality is going to come for some of y'all when y'all realize that the Falcons need to be able to run the football effectively, right? So you're going to need your run game to be even better than what it has been. And I think you need to do that by being able to develop multiple pitches rather than the one pitch that the Falcons tend to be relying on. So we've talked about the play action. We talked about the run game. Now we need to talk about what's arguably the most important thing, which is blending those two things together. And the fact that Zac Robinson didn't really do that in 2024, I think is arguably the biggest indictment of him as a play caller. And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So now that I have a little bit more money in my pocket, thanks to the illustrious Locked On Podcast Network, I want to be smarter with my money. I don't want to be frivolous with my spending. And that's why I've gotten Rocket Money to help monitor my spending. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that's going to help monitor my spending. It's also going to help cancel unwanted subscriptions and help lower bills so I can grow my savings. It brings everything together in one place. And whether that's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even your goals that you want to hit in 2025, Rocket Money is going to help, right? They have over 5 million users and have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Canceling subscriptions is the big selling point for Rocket Money. And you quickly find out, $740 adds up pretty quickly when you find out, I'm wasting $5 here, $8 here, $20 a here a month, and Rocket Money can help you cancel those subscriptions. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So as I said, I think the lack of marriage, the divorce between the play action passing game and the run game is arguably the biggest indictment of Zac Robinson. And this is part of the reason why I'm more critical of Zac Robinson than others, because I had certain expectations going into the season, right? And you've heard me talk many times over the years about, how expectations kind of, affect your perception of things. And I had expectations that Zac Robinson was going to change up the Falcons run scheme, because I was like, well, he can't run outside zone with Kirk Cousins because Kirk Cousins can't really do any of the bootleg play action stuff that you need to do off of outside zone, right? That's the classic play action concept when you run that stretch play, the sort of bread and butter play of the outside zone, right? You run that bootleg where, the offensive line and running back go one way and the quarterback rolls out in the opposite direction. You can't do that with Kirk Cousins, given his limited athleticism, because that, on that stretch play, that backside defender is unblocked. And you need your quarterback to be able to beat that guy to the edge in order to make that play action passing game work. And we knew Kirk wasn't going to be able to do that coming off of the Achilles. He could barely do that, before he got hurt. Right. And so I figured, okay, the Falcons are going to change up their run game. They're going to have a different staple run concept. I figured they'll run split zone because it's similar to outside zone, but instead of having that backside defender unblocked, you motion a blocker there, usually a wide receiver or tight end, to block that backside defender. And it just takes a little bit more pressure off the quarterback to have to win that one-on-one with his legs. Right. And then you can build a play action concept off of that. Right, where instead of blocking that backside defender, that motioning receiver releases into the flat. Now, the Falcons did run split zone this year, but most weeks, maybe once or twice, right? It really wasn't until, I think the Giants game where they ran it maybe like 3 or more. I can't remember. I talked about this on the podcast, but they ran like 3 or 4 times in that game, and that was like the most they'd ever run it I'd seen that season. All right. But they didn't really run the play action off of that until that Giants game. And again, they only did it once or twice in each of the final 3 weeks. Right. And this is why, this is to me a big factor in why I don't think the Falcons play action was as effective, because their run concepts and their play action concepts were divorced. They were not cohesive. The run plays looked one way, the play action concepts looked another way. And, defenses aren't biting as hard because they kind of know what's coming. And so when you look at what the Falcons' favorite run concepts were, the stretch play, again, you build the play action off of that with the bootleg and whatnot. They ran it a couple of times with Kirk. They ran it one time with Michael Penix, right? And then the other favorite run play that you saw over and over again with the Falcons was that sort of insert run play, whether it was Charlie Warner, whether it was one of the wide receivers would, basically motion and then block one of the D tackles or climb to the second level and take out a linebacker. Now, I don't recall, maybe I missed it, but I don't recall a single instance where the Falcons ran a play action concept off of that, where instead of blocking that D tackle or blocking that linebacker, that receiver released into the route. Right now, meanwhile, the Rams did this all the time with, Puka Nacua being that sort of insert player, right? Where they would have Puka acting as that lead blocker, essentially a fullback on their duo run plays between the tackles, similar to how the Falcons would use Raven McLeod basically as a fullback. And you heard us complain about this after the Chargers game because it wasn't particularly effective. But most of the time, Puka would block on those plays. But then a lot of times they would run some play action concepts of it, where Puka would release into a route as opposed to blocking, and the defense wouldn't know what would hit him, right? If you watch last week's game against the Vikings, where the Rams won the playoff game, their first touchdown was basically this concept. Instead of throwing that ball to Puka Nacua, they threw a throwback to Kyron Williams on the touchdown, Play action in the red zone, what a concept, right? By the way, how many times did the Rams run play action in the red zone? 22 times this year, scored 9 touchdowns on it. You know how many times the Falcons ran play action in the red zone this year? Twice. But I think that would probably help the Falcons be a more effective red zone team. But the Rams were actually less efficient than the Falcons in the red zone this year. So we'll use another example: the Broncos with Bo Nix and their young quarterback, right, and his success this year. They ran play action in the red zone 31 times. Bo Nix threw 10 touchdowns off of it, one of which came against the Falcons, you may recall. And so, I'm just sitting here going, good play callers or like Sean McVay and Sean Payton are out here, understanding the value of misdirection. But, Zac Robinson's out here doing his own thing. But I digress. But with the play action and the run game, you got to marry those two in order to maximize both, in my humble opinion. And so basically, you just got to go out there and figure out, okay, here are our 5 favorite run plays, and let's build some play action concepts off of that. And if you don't feel good about the play action concept that you can build off of that, then that shouldn't be one of your 5 favorite run plays. Simple as that, which I don't think was the case this past year, and I'm hoping will be the case in 2024. So I think that's going to be something that we need to see from this Zac Robinson-led offense. It's something that is a staple of the Shanahan-McVay disciples, right? And again, it goes back to expectations, right? And I got to check myself, right? Because I expected one thing, X, and then we got another, Y. And I have to make sure that I'm not just simply denigrating Y simply because it wasn't the thing that I expected. Right. And it's not to sit here and say that the Y that we got from Zac Robinson, he didn't do anything good this year on offense. He did plenty of good things. Despite all my complaints, the Falcons offense fared reasonably well. They had their fair share of moments this year running Y. Right. And I'm not saying you got to stop running Y, but I am saying run Y and also run a little bit of X. Right. If you run X and Y, it's going to make it even harder for defenses to defend you. And again, I think this is a big reason why the Falcons often struggled against good defenses this year. right? When we talk about the downfall of Kirk Cousins, why did Kirk Cousins fall off a cliff, right? The biggest factor was the poor decision making that led to all those turnovers. But I also don't think your play caller did a lot to help him. I think at a certain point in the year, defenses kind of figured out what this offense was going to be, and they just didn't have enough counter punches in it. It was a little too one note under Zac Robinson. And I think, you saw late in the season, once Michael Penix got out there, they added a couple of new wrinkles. And I just hope that they continue to build off of that in 2025 by adding even more wrinkles next season, right? We saw the best defense that this Falcons team faced in those final 3 games with Michael Penix was the 23rd ranked Washington Commanders, 23rd in DVOA. And I've said before, 12 out of your 17 games next year are against defenses that are better than Washington. And that was also the game that Penix struggled the most in, by the way. And so I sit here and I go, like, 12 of your 17 games are against top 22 defenses according to DVOA next year. So the challenge is going to be much higher than certainly what the Panthers were able to show us in that Week 18 game. But, it's hard for me to see the Falcons being able to continue doing what they did in 2024, thinking it's going to be feasible when they're facing better competition next year. And so, again, I get it. The conversation ongoing right now is all about the defensive coordinator and new scheme, and I get that and all that stuff. But ultimately, to me, that's going to be settled by with the players. It's going to be more important to see who the players the Falcons had, right? On defense, it's more about the Jimmies and the Joes and the X's and O's. I think the opposite is true on offense. And I think, when we talk about the future of this football team in a make or break year, you need this offense firing on all cylinders. And I think the current version of the Falcons offense under Zac Robinson isn't good enough at this point in time. And again, y'all think that skepticism is built around, some hatred for Michael Penix. And it's just like, no, we need to see Zac Robinson and this offense making the leap in all 3 of these areas. I expect all improvement in all 3 of these areas, play action, run game, marrying the two. It's just a question of how much improvement do we see, right? Sark, Cutter, and Arthur Smith all showed improvements in year 2 after I was very critical of all 3 of them in their first year. So again, this is a trend that has been the case, right? But in those 3 guys' cases, even though despite they showing improvement in 2018 under Sark, in 2020 under Dirk Cutter, and 2022 under Arthur Smith, the Falcons still failed to make the playoffs. And so here's hoping that Zac Robinson not only shows the improvement that those other guys showed, but even more improvement so that it's going to help allow the Falcons to make the playoffs as they need to in 2025. So those are my thoughts on Zac Robinson. We'll have more thoughts on the Falcons defensive coordinator search, including on Steve Wilks. We'll talk more about where Kyle Pitts figures into all of this as well on tomorrow's episode. Continue to make us your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows daily that get you all geared up for this weekend's playoff action, as well as every other big story going on in the NFL. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.